So this is the site where in March of 2001, so about some months before the Twin Towers, the Buddhas that were in these niches. Now, there are two Buddhas, main large Buddhas. There were that are very high, like 50 meters high. One is called the Eastern Buddha, and one is called the Western Buddha. This is the Western Buddha. But both were blown up over a period of 1 month by Mullah Omar and people. And actually what is not known very well outside of Afghanistan is that it was internal also ethnic rivalry, because the Taliban are mostly Pashtun and the Hazara are the people who live in this region. And the Hazara, there are a lot of troubles between the Hazara, who were considered second-rate citizens traditionally. They're often like, if you have a cleaning woman or a cleaner in the house, they're Hazara. They look a little more like Chinese. They're closer to the Mongolian ethnicities than to the Pakistani, Iranian kind of looking other Tajiks or Pashtuns and so on. So there are these ethnic conflicts also that lie behind this act. But aside from that, it had to do with the iconoclasm of the Taliban in Afghanistan and with the media. So giving this media image. And it happened, yeah, I was very shocked by it, I remember. And I remember conversations with people saying, but why are you so shocked, I mean, about this destruction of art? It's true, it's terrible, but you weren't crying like this when there was this happening and that happening and that happening that didn't have to do with art. And I somehow feel that the bodies of culture are very close to the bodies of people, and that I felt it as something very ominous, and in fact, it sort of was. And also there are trajectories that have to do with personal histories, because Andrea Bruno is an Italian architect who is from Torino, and he went, there are many connections with Afghanistan between archaeologists and various other people throughout the decades, including Boetti, as I mentioned to you, the Arte Povera artist. But Andrea Bruno, the architect from Torino, who had renovated the Castello di Rivoli, where I was working, he was also the person who, as a young man in the 60s, had gone and protected this mountain, because basically there, with some sort of infiltrations of stone and things that would avoid the water going down in these channels and consuming the Buddhas. So it was this paradox between this work, maybe by Andrea Bruno, of protecting something that had been there for almost 2,000 years, and then the fact that it disappeared in just 1 month, you know, and it had survived 2,000 years. And so these are some of the things that I was thinking about in thinking about the Bamyan Buddhas. And when dOCUMENTA started, my work for dOCUMENTA, I immediately thought that I remembered my friend Alighiero Boetti, and he had this one hotel that he was running half of the year, because he was an avant-garde artist in the West half the year, and half the year he was a hotel running person in Kabul ever since 1971 until about 77 or 78, when the Soviet period starts, and then he never went back. And he told me always that the one hotel had been bombed and destroyed. You know, I thought it didn't exist, this building in Kabul. And so I had associated these stories of contemporary art with stories of recent events in Afghanistan. And then I was thinking about the relationship between being in Kassel, where there is this paradox of this greatly important art exhibition, Joseph Beuys and so many artists and thinkers, happening in the place that was also the center of the military armament industry during the Nazi period. So these contradictions and the sense of what is to be done brought me to looking at other places that were in periods of reconstruction, of immediate post-war reconstruction. So when dOCUMENTA starts, we're talking about 1949, 1948 are the first ideas that Bode has. Takes him 5 or 6 years, and 55 it opens. So he's working in a city that is occupied, you know, by the liberators. You know, you have American tanks running around, and it's a city that has been only recently returned to being populated, because after the bombings of 43, Hitler didn't allow the Germans of Kassel to live in Kassel, so they were displaced. So aside from the dead people, they were displaced outside of the city. So in a way, it was a little bit, for over a year and a half, or 2 years even, it was a little bit like one imagines, I mean, for me it was a little bit like one imagines Phnom Penh with nobody in. So I was imagining this city where the plants and the weeds were growing, and the cats were there, and the flowers in the Aue Park, and the rubble, and nobody's there, because only the military could go in. And then suddenly this other forces coming in, and the whole period of reconstruction. And it made me wish to look at other contexts and places in the world that were undergoing today something that is, of course, not similar, because everything is the history that is totally different, but that would have some characteristics that would be similar. And Afghanistan had just returned to a more or less democracy. The museums were opening, the Kabul Archaeological Museum opening, schools for children, girls were going back to school, and the whole country was being rebuilt at the same time as it was occupied by the liberating forces, and same sort of situation, yeah, the American tax. And the problem of Germany having to build itself as a democracy after the war, the problem of nationhood. So knowing that nationalism brought to an extreme can bring to fascism may have, according to Ashraf Ghani, for example, who wrote the book Failed States or something like this, an Afghan politician who was one of the candidates who didn't get any votes for the last presidential elections when Karzai won. Ashraf Ghani, who's a very interesting intellectual, Marxist, and then studied at Columbia, and then decided to go back, and he was one of the returned diaspora building the country. When I interviewed him about this question, he said, well, the analogy is that it is about building an Islamic state, knowing that the extremes to which Islamism can bring. So how to build a national state knowing the extremes, how to build an Islamic state knowing this. So there's this tension that could be also another thing to think about if I were to write about it or think about it, he said. So anyway, because I found it rather unethical to simply connect Kassel to places in the world where trauma and conflict had occurred, and that were in a state of reconstruction and the building of civil society, because I thought that was a little bit violent to simply go anywhere in the world that would be in that context. One could have picked Cambodia, one could have picked a number of places around the world. I refrained from it, but because there was a story that had to do with our stories, the stories of the art world, the stories of art, the stories that Vasari tells in his Lives of the Artists, the stories that we tell each other about artists moving from this place to that place, or doing this or doing that, the stories around art. Because Afghanistan had this story that is one of our stories. Another story is, you know, Robert Barry in Halifax and the stories of meeting up there during the summers and what happened. So there are stories. So this story of Boeti somehow gave a legitimation, in my view, for something like dOCUMENTA to be involved in Afghanistan. So it is the fact that, let's say, history, but also the micro-history of the art community met in this crux, which is the story of this artist's life, who was from Arte Povera, from Torino, myself, him being one of my mentors, and so on. This very personal story of the relationship with Boeti, what he taught me about the world. He always said that art is only bringing into the world what is already there, you know. So that might be one of the roots. Mettere al mondo il mondo, to bring the world into the world, was one of the words that he wrote with his ballpoint pen monochrome works, Mettere al mondo il mondo, because so much of the vision of Arte Povera and the vision of his work was in my background, and because that story was a story that lies at the roots of the need to negotiate Western modernities and transnational alliances that can be forged across the globe, because of the early period in which he was addressing that question, for good and for bad, with the results that one might think are positive or not. But he was one of the only artists in Europe that at that time was wishing to deal with the question of the world at large and artisticness at large, the aesthetic at large. How does my being an avant-garde artist in the tradition of Western modernity meet the history of cultures and civilizations that in the background don't necessarily have that, and may have, for example, a very different relationship or attribution of importance to decoration, for example, and patterning, for example. So these are questions that so many people have addressed after, but at that time, it was quite rare to be thinking about these things. So patterning, color, decoration, bringing the povertà of decoration into the sphere of high art and removing it from the sphere of craft in the normal, except for in very remote feminist circles, that wasn't really being thought about much. This question of craft, for example, and decoration, and what makes art art, and how one can reimagine what art is in a broader way, and so on. Taking into consideration all these different cultures and histories of civilization around the world. So, because of that particular story of Boeti and the way that it evolved, even within the story, you know, with the story that Boeti's hotel was bombed and destroyed and he had to leave, and the story of his tapestries, the tapestries made with tapestry makers in Kabul in the one hotel, on the drawings that he would send or give to them while he was there and work with them, actually. Because of all of this, I thought that it was okay, you know. It somehow was okay to go. And we didn't go with the idea of doing a section of dOCUMENTA there at all. We just went with the idea of looking for the one hotel. And we being these people. So the first trip was Mariam Ghani. She was an Afghan diaspora artist living in New York. Michael Tausig. I asked Mick Tausig to come with me. I don't know why. I just thought it was an interesting thing. And Francis Alice and Mario Garcia Torres. Mario because of his interest in the Boeti story, which dates back to 2006, when he had a residency in Italy at the Ratti Foundation in Como. He began to be interested in the story of the one hotel in Kabul, but had not gone there. So this is just a group in there, and The pictures are kind of strange. I also asked Mike Rakovitz to come. Actually, I forgot Mike. He also came. And the reason for asking Mike Rakovitz to come is because he had been working for a while on the project, the Invisible Enemy is whatever. The Invisible Enemy, let me try to find that title, which had to do with the Baghdad Museum, the looting and destruction of the objects in the Baghdad Museum. So I thought he was interested, he would be very sensitive to the Invisible Enemy Should Not Exist, is a project that he started and is an ongoing project where he does these moments of workshop where he rebuilds with other people, telling each other stories, the objects, the thousands of objects that were in the Baghdad Museum and that had been lost and looted. And they're all recorded on many websites. And through the fact that the police try to get them back, they were looted the day after the American troops entered into Baghdad. So there was this irony or paradox that Mike, the artist, who was born in Iraq, and he's a Iraqi Jewish diaspora, grew up in Brooklyn but was born in Iraq. He was taken aback by the paradox of this liberation of Baghdad from Saddam Hussein, the day after which the museum had lost thousands of precious objects that had been there for so long. It was one of the most important museums in the Middle East. So he decided to do a reconstruction of these objects slowly, and it's an ongoing project, so whenever he has a chance or has an occasion, he does a workshop and he'll pick some off the internet, because the police have all the pictures, you know, and they got some of them back, you know, from soldiers and people that had taken them, and they got a lot back, but they didn't get all of them back. So it's a very colorful, joyful papier-mâché objects, you know, it covered with labels from consumer objects, goods that papier-mâché remaking of these, and every workshop is accompanied by storytelling and the stories of the director of the Baghdad Museum, and the stories and the story of the object is here. And it's been shown, it kind of is a very globalized artwork in a way, because it lives in all these incarnations. For example, this was when it was in Sharjah, at the Sharjah Biennale. Some of the other pictures were in Istanbul. This is still Sharjah. It's been shown in Chicago in the exhibition now about archaeology, the shovel and the shovel exhibition that Dieter Rollstraat has just curated. It's been shown in London and many places. So it's an ongoing work, which again brings together people around objects, let's say, which seems to be like in the work of Fejvovic and Goldberg, somehow a characteristic either of this dOCUMENTA or of our times, that there is something going on between things and their materialities and people. So it's not performance art, it's not sculpture, it's not social sculpture, but it's something in the relations between people and things that make this, it's not installation, but it's something performance / installation / relational / sculpture. And often contingent on the presence of an object there that creates a field where something can occur, which is why that photograph of the Gonzalez sculptures and the man and the woman were so important also, because it's this field of relation between the human and the inhuman, let's say, specifically the art object, which is not the artwork. The artwork is the project that entails all of this that we've discussed, but the art object as being a stand-in for all inhuman or non-human things or materials with which we relate, which makes the collecting of today's artworks very difficult. Because people will collect, you know, a piece of this table, and so it remains as a kind of marker or leftover of an artwork, which is very also performative under the form of workshop or some sort of teaching or being together situation. So because he had been working on this for some years, I decided to invite him, and that's what a curator does also. They think this particular artist is particularly sensitive to this particular kind of problematique. So what happens if you take Mike Rakovitz, who's done this project around the Baghdad Museum, and connect it with Bamiyan? Not just connect it in your way of installing the works. It's not about installing the Bactrian princess and installing an artwork by Mike Rakovitz and making a connection, which is how the generals prepare war. It is about opening up the possibility of worlding. What stories do we tell so that other stories can be told? What story did he tell with the Baghdad Museum so that other stories could be told with Bamiyan? And my point is actually not linking or connecting or making a purely curatorial association, but it is in creating the conditions for that other entity which doesn't exist in the world to emerge and come into the world. So I invited him, and no, I don't want to close all tabs. I don't even know what I want to do with all this. Okay, so Mike visited Kabul, and we went to Bamiyan, and he decided to do a tripartite artwork. And the artwork was called, in Kassel, What Dust Will Rise. And I'm going to show you. This is the installation in Kassel. And a close-up of the vitrine, one of the vitrines is this. So it combines a number of stone-carved books, objects looking like books, on glass transparent tables, on which glass there were notations in pen, and a number of vitrines previously belonging to the Landesmuseum in Kassel and basically thrown away, put in the deposits. Landesmuseum in Kassel was the museum for pre-20th century art, and it was the museum of decorative arts as well. So you would have cups and teapots and things in these historical objects that have to do with the history of Hessia would have been located in these vitrines previously to Mike's installation. And what you saw there and what you read, I mean, storytelling is very much part of Mike's work. So you didn't need the wall text of the curator. He had his own wall text. And the wall text spoke about the materials out of which these books were made. And the materials out of which these books were made were stone coming from, it's a limestone coming from the Bamiyan Buddha area. So from the same cliffs where the Bamiyan Buddhas were. And he reminded the viewers that with this drawing, for example, that the Buddhas had been blown up. And these objects here are shrapnel from leftover bombs of the Bamiyan Buddha site, which he picked up when he was there. And other shrapnel from other exploded bombs. So you could call it evidence in a way. It's evidence in a story, or objects that refer to a story. And also, there were references in this. So you knew that the materials were coming from those mountains. But the shape of the books were actually, the shape of the books are books copied from the surviving books that survived the bombings of Kassel and the Friedrichianum during the bombing in particular of 1941. So there is no logic that is reasonable to make this book out of the shape of this. This is not the exact model of that at all, obviously, but there is no logic behind saying, I'm going to remake the book, I'm going to enter into some form of symbolic reparation and remake the book out of the Bamiyan Buddha site stone in the shape of the books that were destroyed in Kassel. There's no logic to that. It's illogical. You know, why do you do that? If you ask why do you do that, I mean, it's almost a strange metaphor that doesn't make any sense. You know, it's like wrong. It's like art historically is historian's nightmare, you know, to take this object of material culture that's supposed to tell one story and bring it together with the materials from another material culture of another story that has no connection whatsoever with the first one. So it's a nightmare of a historian. It makes no sense, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it doesn't make any sense because he did it. And the people who carved these books are, I mean, we can go into all the connections. I'm not really saying it makes no sense, but from a sort of a logical historical perspective of any historical research to discover anything that we can then publish as a new knowledge in the sphere of our knowledge of the history of Europe or our knowledge of the history of Afghanistan, there is no new knowledge. So there is no knowledge created here, that it constituted knowledge in a way. But what he does tell us is that these books were crafted. First, he tells us that he himself was a stone carver prior to being a conceptual performance, research-based artist. He started his life as a stone carver. And he tells us also that when he was studying as a student at art school, he had 2 or 3 images before him that he used in his class. One of them was the Bamiyan Buddhas. One of them was the Pietà of Michelangelo. And that when the Buddhas blew up, he was really quite shocked because it lay at the birth of his studies as a young artist at school. So we know that, and this was not carved by him. It was carved by master stone carvers in the north of Italy, near Trieste, actually. And these are the Cosmateschi. They are the most well-known stone carvers in Italy that continue traditions from the Middle Ages to today. So he went to one of the highest, let's say, places of European craft to craft these books that had been destroyed with the stone that was used to make the Bamiyan Buddhas, but not the leftover pieces of the Buddhas, stone from the same area. And that was all that was in the exhibition. Well, I mean, there were many stories about the bombing of this, of the bombing of Kassel, and Griselda reminded me that in his captions, in his storytelling, he tells the story that there were pieces of Coventry that...
There was a little story in one of the cases.
Yes,
yeah.
that I had forgotten that.
When they bombed Kassel, they bombed it with... When the RAF bombed Germany, they dumped the rubble of Coventry, which had been bombed by the German Air Force, back on Germany. So in addition to the bombs, they dumped a whole bunch of rubbish.
Yes, so there was
this rubble from the other site, which just
amazing.
It was like one of those kind of moments where your mind blows up at the whole notion of Coventry raining down on the poor Kasselians who, in this curious way, there is this sort of matter. So it's another of these.
Yes, it's another transaction of matter, which with symbolic meaning. But yes, and so you have this stone from Kabul, from Bamiyan, falling on Kassel. You have German troops occupying Afghanistan. You have rubble from Coventry falling on Kassel. You have this sort of web of conflicts going on through the materials of stone, through the material of stone. So that was all there was in Kassel. And in Kabul, however, or actually in Bamiyan, in Kabul, there was a part of the exhibition, and there was the exhibition of this book. This is the exhibition in Kabul. The guy with the green scarf is the education department person. There were like 20 people from the university who became dOCUMENTA storytellers, and they would tell...
The dOCUMENTA scarf, or was that?
Yes, that's the dOCUMENTA scarf, the same ones that were in Kassel.
Right.
And they wore them. You see, the dOCUMENTA scarf you can wear as ever you want. You know, that was something that I also did.
Well, you did a demonstration about how you could wear the dOCUMENTA scarf.
Yes, so everybody wore it how they wanted. That was so he's explaining the exhibition to the visitors here, and this is the room without without visitors. And here on the wall is also the story of the fact that this particular book, which is this one, was a book that was not destroyed, survived the bombings, because it was parchment, not paper, and it dried after the bombings, the days after the bombings, and the way that it reacted to heat and to drying, being it's skin, you know, it's the body of animals, parchment, so it's skin. So of course this carried many assonances with Mike about bodies and skin and burning and ovens and all of that. But it also turned into this accordion type figure, a sort of musical instrument almost, that he found very beautiful as a form, which turned into this book, which now, as part of his participation in the dOCUMENTA, was donated to the National Archaeological Museum of Kabul. So near the fragments of the Buddhas that were destroyed in Kabul, not in Bamiyan, you have this object. So this is another story, small detail of a story, of how things continue, the after effects of dOCUMENTA. So 10 years from now, 20 years from now, someone visiting the Archaeological Museum in Kabul will look at this, and then it will be like Ragris, 2012. A book in the shape of a burnt book in Kassel, made by northern Italian stonemakers with stone from Bamiyan, donated in 2012. You know, so there's this, and his title, the piece was "What Dust Will Rise." You know, what dust will rise is a part of an expression, an Afghan expression as well, which is what dust will rise with only one horseman, which means you cannot do anything on your own, you have to collaborate as a group. What dust will rise with one horseman? Nothing. So his piece is called, the whole project is called What Dust Will Rise. But the artwork exists in a series of lines of flight going in many directions, which is why you cannot say where the artwork is. It is in this display in Kassel. It is in that display in Kabul. It is in this object in the National Gallery, in the Archaeological Museum of Kabul. It is in what goes on today in Bamiyan. We don't know. It's in all of these places. It has many different outputs, the same way that we have many different hats in our age. You know, I'm an artist, I'm a curator, I'm a bookbinder, I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm also a mother, and I'm this and that. You know, most people will answer this. So why should an artwork also have such a defined status of what it is, you know, where it is? It is the object in the Kabul Museum. It is the workshop that he did, which I would like to show you now and tell you about. And it is in many places and ways. Now, one of the ways that it took place, this artwork, is a workshop to teach people to do sculpture in Bamiyan. Bamiyan is a rather large town, but people have not been doing sculpture for many centuries because it wasn't part of the tradition anymore after the Buddhist thing collapsed. I mean, it continued, but not so much. But it had been part of the tradition for way before the Buddhist period, thousands of years, because of the softness of the stone. And if you look at the mountains, you really see that it's not about Buddha or Buddhism. You see how there's all these little holes. It's like a Gruyere cheese. And in all of these little holes are thousands of Buddhas. People sculpted them very small all over the place. So the city is in the valley below. Let me just show you Bamiyan. It's a beautiful, beautiful valley. You see, the A77 is the old Silk Route. And the Bamiyan Buddhas are on this side. But all along here, And it has something to do also with Boeti, because Bamiyan is very near the Bandamir Lakes, which I'll show you, which is where Alighiero wanted his ashes to be thrown after he died. So if you look at these landscape, like this one, you'll see, oh, here's the Eastern Buddha and the Western Buddha and all of them, if we can get this picture. This is the Western Buddha, this is Eastern Buddha. These are the two that were blown up. This Buddha is the seated Buddha that had been already destroyed in the mid-90s, and all of these are holes with Buddhas. And the city of Bamiyan is looking towards that. So in a way, it's a little bit as if on a symbolic level, I think the people of Bamiyan for thousands of years were engraving people in the, it's like another city, a little bit like the city of the dead in Luxor, you know, on the other side of the river. I think it has something to do with understanding death, or this is just my idea, that it has to do with population and people, and the fact that we will go back to the mountain and we will be in the mountain, and there are all our ancestors in the mountain, and it's full of people, whether it's dust or it's me being dust. So in one of those particular caves, I think it's exactly this one, or right behind it, it's at this height, Mike Rakovic proposed to do a workshop on sculpture. So he went back to his earliest period, like Tastadine went back to her earliest period. And he invited people of all ages and gender, and the mayor of Bamiyan even took part in it, and together with an Afghan sculptor who does mainly tombstones and stuff, they both together taught this workshop collaboratively. And they were working with Bernd Praxenthaler, who is also one of the archaeologists who from Munich was working on the Eastern Buddha, because the German government archaeologists work on the Eastern Buddha. Everybody, it's like split up. It's a UNESCO sort of site for taking care of them and so on. And I would like to show you a few minutes of this workshop. But prior to showing you that, I want to tell you that what was then the result of the workshop in Bamiyan was exhibited in the Kabul exhibition of dOCUMENTA. I think I can show you if there's a picture. We saw these two pictures, but we didn't see, I can't see a picture of the room. Okay, I can't see a picture of the room with these objects, but what I wanted to tell you is that these objects, he did not want to show them in Kassel. So again, there was this kind of, it was an ethical political discussion that went on about the voyeurism of wanting to show, these are the objects that were sculpted by the Afghans in the workshop in Bamiyan. That he felt that that was voyeuristic and uninteresting, and it didn't make sense, because this is a workshop for, you know, Art Students 101. So what wouldn't make any sense? But it was part of the exhibit. In all of these niches, there was Buddhas. Here, back here, there was one centuries ago. So, and the reason for doing this workshop was that there is a debate going on in UNESCO and in the government in Afghanistan, which is tension. There's a tension because the Afghans want to rebuild the Bamiyan Buddhas. And the international archaeologists and the UNESCO don't want to rebuild the Bamiyan Buddhas. They think it's kitsch and it's like Euro Disney and it shouldn't be done. It's absurd. It goes against all Western considerations around conservation, which from the time of the 1940s and 30s were premises laid down by an Italian, actually. The principles of that went against the principles of Violette Le Duc in the 19th century, which had to do with reconstruction, and it was a good thing to rebuild things. And that went swaying to the opposite in the 20th century with the man who wrote the principles, the 20 principles that are also still at the basis of UK, everywhere around the world in the West, conservation principles. Like if you do reintegrate, if you do add new material, it must be visible, that is different, it's not the original material. So if you're putting color back, it has to be a tratteggio, and you have to be visible from close, but from far you can see the effect. All of these are that have to do with the original intention also of the artist has to be respected. and so on and so forth. Because of these principles of Western conservation art, everybody's against rebuilding these Buddhas. But both the local community in Bamyan, most people, citizens of Bamyan, and many people in the government of Afghanistan would love to do it because they don't see why not. Because the Buddhas were carved and then fell apart and carved and fell apart for centuries, all over that, for like 150 kilometers. So they see as a fetishization the fact that we must keep these holes. Most of them. And this is a political tension. So the artist comes in, speaking about politics and arts and what artists do. Mike comes in and says, what to do? Well, I don't think anybody should decide what's going to happen there except for the people that are there over time. They'll figure it out by themselves. So what I can do is be a catalyst to simply empower the ability to carve. So I will do a workshop in sculpture and teach people to do sculpture that then can do sculpture, that then can do sculpture. And I mean, who knows what will happen in 10 years, 20 years. There might not be the Buddha in that place. There might be something else carved a kilometer down the road. But there might be the Buddha again. It's not predictable. But I just make the ball roll. So the artistic project was a project of empowerment within, and the creation of a third position. We said, I wanted to show you the little film of the workshop, because I have a little documentation of it. Just to stop talking. We don't have the sound, though. I have to plug it in. Oh, here it is. Yes. So this is not an artwork. This document is not on sale by his gallery or anything. It's just something that he uses in his talks. It's just a few minutes. But there's something quite oniric again, It's more typical of dreams where substitutions and removals and slippages occur, that you kind of go back from Bamyan, go home, and you have this dream that there's this workshop of sculpture. And it has some surreal quality to it. And it alters a little bit the imaginary system. I mean, I believe in the way that art puts things into the world that can alter the imaginary system that is controlled very much by individuals who decide what is to be seen on CNN, what is to be seen on Al Jazeera also. And you can actually interfere with those systems. It has to do with what Judith Butler wrote in her book, Frames of War, where she speaks about the frames of recognizability and how the frames of recognizability can be altered. And that's part of the commitment to modify the frames of recognizability of a place, a person, a history. It's almost over. It's funny because at the end there's the mayor, so then there's the guard. Well, I'm not saying that this is art, actually. I don't even think, I wouldn't want to say, actually I don't think so. I think it's part of a broader project that is art. And it doesn't really matter to me, actually, if it's art. But I don't think the video is art. Yes. Yes. Please speak while you're...
I was sorry, just the microphone.
It seems to me to link, though, with what you said at the very beginning of your session yesterday, which was your question about, or your speculation about where art was now.
Yes.
It seems to me to link very much with that. These kinds of activities which are initiated by artists. Okay, I'm not talking about this particular film as art or not. I'm talking about
so-called activist art projects.
No, not activist art projects. Just what is initiated by an artist.
Yes.
Okay, is maybe
what processes are initiated.
What processes are initiated is where art is in one sense now. Okay.
That's interesting.
Not activist art. I don't mean as a category.
Yeah, because that,
I mean as an attitude or an initiation of something.
Yes.
That seems
I
to me.
think so. Catalyzing things, like catalyzing the Afghan film restoration projects, catalyzing.
But when you were talking about his logic being a nightmare for an art historian, okay, it's actually a dream for an artist.
Yes. Oh, here you see the valley outside. So this is what the Buddhas were looking at, by the way, speaking about different positions. They were looking at that for centuries.
Yeah.
There's an amazing novel which I can't get out of my head as I'm watching this by Michael Ondaatje, which is about a young forensics archaeologist or...
That's the Hindu Kush. You see the mountains in the back? Oh, sorry. Yes.
Anyway, she goes back to Sri Lanka just at the point at which it's a very, very dangerous thing to do, and there's constant, terror all around her. But she works with somebody. They discover a body, which ultimately, obviously, has been knocked off by the government. But it's very interesting that they have to recover what this body is. And watching that, because they work out that he must have been something because the nature of his ankles. So that he has to have been sitting cross-legged, putting certain kinds of pressure. So they work out that he's actually a sculptor. And he was the Buddha maker. And the thing to do with the Buddhas is that you construct them, you sculpt them, but you are not allowed to look into their eyes. So you have a special painter who comes at the very end with his assistant, right, who is blindfolded, who has to hold up a mirror so that the painter has to paint the eyes backwards.
How interesting.
So there's a whole fascinating kind of dimension about going back to what you were saying about when you invest art objects with a certain kind of ritual or ritual or sacred power, etc., around them. But I was just very fascinated by this, the level at which you're training people to carve feet.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, obviously, when you're carving these big Buddhas, I mean, like all of these things, you make them out of bits. You can't sculpt something at that great point level, but you obviously, I don't know if they did that, etc. But watching them learn the elements, going back to your Bactrian princesses and their perfect fit, these sort of elements. But that really is the most extraordinary novel. If anybody's interested, it's because it captures something in a very different, in a literary way, about this zones of conflict, zones of trauma, the kind of terror on which these things, the uncovering, the use and the forensic archaeology, when it's sort of forensic. I mean, there's a lot. What are they actually called? These people. So there's a lot of work about the people who went to Rwanda who had to do these forensic. They are forensic archaeologists.
Yes.
To recover the bodies, to identify things that we just had this one very recently, which are these very, very bodily traces of these visitors. But the thing about the Buddha, you have to paint it backwards, like looking in a mirror. I just thought that was very fascinating.
Amazing.
Did you want to say something, Jen?
Thank you. I've had my question answered. I was wondering how they got into the cave, and when you showed that picture, the steps.
Up at the left. You actually, when we are here in this first picture, I showed you. Where is it? This one. We're right up at the top of where the Buddhas are. That's where, of course, Andrea Bruno was working above, to consolidate the mountain side and so on. This is leftover tank, Soviet tank, that Francis Alice is leaning on.
The stories that artists tell that you kind of have the power to influence to a certain extent in choosing artists or working together with them, curating them.
Not anymore. I'm
no, well,
not
but
curating
at,
right now.
yeah, at some point.
Yes.
At some point, I mean, you had an active
Yes.
role in it.
Yes,
You know,
super.
a catalytic, role in it.
A what role?
A catalytic or
catalytic,
agential,
yes.
or
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. I agree. Yes.
So, are these stories that are imbued with a certain authority? Are they being questioned now, or are other stories developing out of those stories? I mean, on a storytelling level.
Yes, I think other
so
stories are
happening?
being developed for sure. There are an infinite number of stories going on now in Afghanistan or in people's minds. I mean, I don't know all the stories, but I do think that these stories generate stories. And there are also chapters of stories. Tacita did her book after the dOCUMENTA. It wasn't part of the dOCUMENTA, so it is a story that continued.
Mm-hmm.
You mean, does the story of Boeti change? Of course the story of Boeti changes, because the story that was told was that it ended, the one hotel, and now the story of the one hotel has another chapter to it, which is that the one hotel was used for Mario Garcia Torres's artwork. He used his budget to restore the one hotel building and take off the bars and plant the roses in the garden and paint and clean up the furniture and host people and serve tea and host many of the seminars we had. Natasha Zader Hagigian, the Iranian artist who lives between Berlin and Tehran, she did her seminar in the one hotel. So that is part of Mario Garcia Torres's artwork. And that is a story that has changed the story of Alighiero Boeti's one hotel. Mm-hmm. You cannot now avoid this other chapter to the story.
No, I was just wondering, or just an open question. Are there certain media, certain channels who are trying to give certain stories, particular authority?
No. I don't know.
Not?
Maybe.
Is there, are there gatekeepers, policing? And on the other hand, what about the tension? I mean, as you said, historical historians or historical knowledge always being kind of imbued with this aura of authenticity, truth, and all that, and as soon as you kind of not declassified is not the right word, but say it is part of an art, but you want your art also to be very specific, very detailed, very culturally embedded. So you have this tension, of course, and this ongoing tension using something that may not be necessarily super historically correct, like using material from one period and putting it together with other things that would make sense within the kind of the overall artwork, but maybe not for a historian who would look at it from a more evidence-based or documentary type of perspective. But then, when the work has been built, has had its own history, personal history or so, it of course changes. Of course, and all works have an afterlife. So how is this? I don't know. I'm just imagining here something. This tension between using other people's histories or things that have happened in a very imaginative, very creative way on the one hand, but maybe, possibly, I don't know, insisting on the kind of the authenticity and the historical truth or specificity of your own artwork once it's been taken out of a context and then develops further on in the future. Just, wondering by other people, being used by...
I don't know. Does anyone have anything to say to that? I mean, I don't understand exactly. It's not that Mike Rakovitz is saying the Bamyan Buddhas blew up in some other place. He's not saying anything that is against the histories of those places. Or there can be some fictions, like for example, you can't know if that workshop really happened or if this was staged with actors. You don't know that. I mean, I'm telling you that. And he's telling us that. but you don't know if that's true. I could be lying. This could be just a performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah,
and on that level, you
the
can't know. You
possibilities.
just, and it doesn't really matter, does it? I mean, if you want the tail, you can take the tail. That brings up, I mean, if that's your question, I mean, is this historical fact? Did we actually rent the one hotel? You know, if you want to find out if that's true, you can go and find the documents. As a historian, you can go and find the rental contract that was signed by the director of the Goethe Kabul and the owners of the building, and you would say, oh, well, then it's true. I mean, if that's the purpose, if the purpose is to find out if this is all a fiction or if there's historical fact to, if the documenta ever happened in Kabul or ever happened in Kassel, you can find out if it ever happened in Kassel, either by believing the fact that a certain number of witnesses went, and so statistically so many people say that it happened in Kassel, it must have happened, even though you personally didn't go, right?
No,
So
that wasn't so much
the
my
truthfulness
question.
was not the question.
No,
I didn't understand.
there are just coming out of cultural studies work having to do with historical truth. I mean, film, representation of
What is
anything
historical
that.
truth? I mean,
I know.
I don't believe in revisionism,
What
but
are you really asking?
I'm asking, is there a tension in the development of an artwork that when artists use material that already has a particular specific history, and you just mentioned it in one sentence where you said it's a nightmare for a kind of historian, or
no,
if I
the
understand
nightmare is that it is not justified as part of historical research to spend your time and money carving books out of Bamiyan Buddha stone in the shape of books that were burnt in Kassel. That brings no historical knowledge to the body of knowledge of history of neither one place nor the other.
Yeah.
So that is the nightmare. The nightmare is that one would be spending time and funding and people and energy to do something that gives you no more further knowledge, neither about the Nazis and Germany and the British and the bombing, nor about that. But it has nothing to do with the work itself that was made enters into that history with an artwork. So the artwork has brought these two disparate things and stories together, has linked them forever. So from now on, you cannot speak about Kassel bombed books without at least saying there's this part of the story that they were remade by this artist called Mike Rakovits for the dOCUMENTA 13. I mean, you can't, you have this new element of history, which is an artwork. Mm-hmm. It's like saying once the Sistine Chapel is made, the Sistine Chapel is made, and it enters into the history of Rome and of the Vatican and of and you just take it into consideration. It's like a new material that as a historian you take into consideration. But it's not that Mike Rakovits has reread past historical readings and contradicted them. He's not doing that. Some artists have done that. There are many artworks that are based on revealing some history that's not been told and that needs to be told or whatever. So that happens. This is not that. This is not that. But I don't know if that's the answer to your question.
Can I intervene there a little bit? Because if we take the word the nightmare out, because I thought Alison did very nicely, because what is a nightmare for a historian might be a dream for an artist.
Yes.
It's a very interesting
Exactly.
kind of play on this, etc. But what I thought you were raising up, and have been raising up in the way that you conceptualized and brought dOCUMENTA into being, is that there are logics which are what people in art history are trained to think are the only logics by which you can make connections. Succession, style, influence, certain kinds of consistencies. But there are also post-Foucault genealogies. So we go back to Nietzsche, then we go through Foucault, we understand the possibilities. So for instance, the my virtual feminist museum, both, there's a quote from Adrian Rifkin about this is the most unreasonable
Yes, I
project.
remember that one.
So, and that was, I thought, thank goodness, because I'm working against the so-called reason of art history to reveal that there are other configurations which will produce for us some different understanding
Yes.
of different kinds of relationalities which cross, which are not based on chronology, sequence, succession, right? And that I learned a lot from this from, you know, talking to Alison, going to museums and understanding that artists simply didn't see what the art historian is being trained to find as the only logics with which you can connect arts with. So this idea of
You
configuration.
mean like influence? To
and
see
even
the
in the
influence from one artist to another would
all
be...
of these tying things in some sort of unilinear or classificatory or categorizable element, whereas the incident, what you've been talking about in one sense is the incident, the rupture, the event, the encounter, the translation, we've had the Hermes, that we're all using these new words and struggling with the sense that do they fall into a kind of unreason that has no possible kind of retrieval? Are they just fantasies? And I think what Brenda's getting at is, again, going back to our kind of responsibility, and even where we did in the first session, why we were reading Barad and the question of this sort of ethical, that if we enter into the world where we say, okay, we're abandoning classical Western reason and the kind of categories, we are going to allow ourselves maybe to think momentarily artistically or be taught by artistic thinking, but also be taught by the electrons and the photons and their entanglements into other ways of thinking. Where might a certain responsibility meet a certain responsibility?
Ability to respond.
The ability to respond. And this sense, so in one sense there is something that resists simple projection, imagination, and instrumentalization of anything. We can't just jump out of history and say, oh, we can do anything we like. So that there seems to me what you were plotting out with Mike was a series of elements. Not all of them constituted the moment which we'd say, there's the transformation, there's the act, there's the work, which did involve, when we went to see it, you know, it did involve walking around, it did involve thinking about that, it did remember, across the way, that was where the museum, that these vitrines came from, and sensing they're literally their historical timing, you know, in something, and that they're being used in that sort of way. And all of those elements, the glass tables, the what you know, all of the stuff, and the putting something as heavy as stone on the table, all of those elements were there to do their work, right? And the configuration was both planned and required us to work that one out, which I found, anyway, I won't go into the Emily Lucia because that was the other side of it, etc. But when you then bring in the story of it, it's not that the story then validates the work. It's that we then begin to think about another level of its becoming. And I think Brenda's quite right to ask, well, where does that then exist as part of, in a sense, the aftermath? So one of the things that I'm just thinking about as we kind of bringing this round again, which is what, you know, the experience of working with you over the next 6 months, to be both a community to think with you as you think back over what happened, also for us to understand a process which we're very interested in learning about. What are these other processes for
what was behind or before or aside?
But it obviously something to do with the question of
to what purpose?
No, but the question of the stories and where they will ruin. So if we go away, do we go away and say, you know, I mean, I think it's a very important question that Brenda's raised about where what we've learned from talking with you is for us in relation, because there isn't yet a model quite for.
So you mean, what are we going to do with it?
That sounds too instrumental. No, just, it's the question which we're going to think about. You know, Yeah, but the sense it's not a kind of infinite. So because these are very, very historical stories you're telling about the moments through which dOCUMENTA came to be and different artists came in.
But I think the stories also, I mean, there are stories, but they are also enacted and embodied stories, and they are not stories also because there are people living now doing certain things that they wouldn't have done had that not happened. So they do have very daily life consequences.
No lack of meaning for the story. It's very, very interesting to think about.
On the symbolic level.
Yeah. How these, and what we're going to, how we're going to be different people now that we've shared some of these.
Well, what do you think? Let me turn the question around. Oh, wait, first, go ahead.
When Brenda was speaking, I was just thinking that an intervention is different to a distortion, and it reminded me of something we read in the reading yesterday, the Barad piece, and she's just talking about, in an important sense, touch is the primary concern of physics, and just skipping a bit, once you start looking at it this way, you get a dizzying feeling as things shift. This particular take on physics and its history may entail a perturbation from the usual storylines, but it is far from a gross distortion. I offer this twist on the usual framing as a provocation for opening up new ways of thinking about both physics and touch. And it also reminded me of what, Carolyn, you were talking about, of I can't remember it specifically, but if people aren't working on certain projects, how a space that opens up could be then occupied or reappropriated by the right. I can't remember exactly.
Oh, that's interesting.
But I think in terms of like thinking about the historic, like interventions in historical records that create new stories, I just think that the idea of the perturbation of a record and how important it is for more than historians to be working with that material. And also the interesting thing is that, I mean, the book carved in stone was not actually affecting the historic, like what the remnant of the book. So that I think the nature of the intervention is interesting as well, because it wasn't there was no disturbance of the historical record in the sense that it was being damaged.
Yeah, that's I think what I meant by saying it doesn't. When I said he doesn't lie, what I meant was he doesn't like change. In this particular case, it wasn't about rewriting a history with a new opposite fact that would be in contrast. I mean, there was no contrast. But I want to understand better what Brenda is saying. What is the answer to the question from your perspective?
In a superficial way, I was thinking of my own PhD, which I did on a large, the Chicago Columbian World's Fair at Chicago, 1893. And I was looking at texts, literature, novels, essays, romances, storytelling, basically, which would narrate or, looking at end of the 19th century, a slightly different approach, but there was something to the open text that these texts did, that enriched it, made it more complicated, subversive texts, both affirmative and subversive, mythologizing them, and so on and so forth. So I was thinking on that kind of level, basically. But then also just asking myself in which ways, again, coming more from a 19th century perspective, those texts gave a certain authority to certain stories, whether they be true or not, through certain channels. So that was part of my question. That is just, and also from newer work, which I've done in documentary film, this kind of where you have this evidence-based desire, to give evidence to something that, at least it's. I mean, we know that's not true, but something that's been there, and you tell stories about it, kind of historically specific, politically kind of important, context. So when you mentioned works working within highly politicized, environments, it is it's not as if it is just Kabul or it is just Afghanistan. There is in the, once you approach, you know, with your knowledge, you know, our Western knowledge, and you have to kind of break it down what kind of knowledge it is. These are representative objects, or, you know, not representatives, but objects of representation. And it is a question of representation that you then enter into to a certain extent. So again, I was thinking about what do you do with the stories that actually, that, you know, these 2 days were so rich and so kind of overwhelmingly kind of, you know, even exciting, fascinating, you know, listening to your stories. So I take with me some embodied knowledge of a historical, a very particular moment here with you, that I in a way want to share, that I want to respond to, but I don't know how. That I want to you know, open up to other people, to share with me, blah, blah, blah. All these things, and you know, all this was, I haven't thought it through at all, but it kind of came together in this very kind of, you know, very well formulated question.
I mean, one part of me says that I don't want to go down the road of saying, being prescriptive and saying what political effects this work will have or has had, because I think that's contradictory to the task, basically.
Not expecting.
No, but I mean, if that were, I mean, I think this type, for example, this artwork of Michael Rakowitz actually changes a lot on it. I mean, it intervenes into a very delicate, not only cultural politics, but political situation in Afghanistan, as did the whole dOCUMENTA, I think. Mm-hmm. But I can't go out and say this was all done because what Mike and I really want is that everybody, you know, the foreigners leave, that they get the hell out, and that the Afghan people in Bamiyan just redo the Buddhas. And I mean, that would be for me not, it might be true in the sense that what I'm interested is that the forms of life and the forms of art somehow coincide. It's about forms of life, forme di vita, in the way that Agamben might speak of that. That the forms of life and the forms of art are one. So in a way, it's like a very old vision. It's like Joseph Beuys' vision, although he was a little bit, maybe not always sincere, but officially, I mean, and in many moments of his work, that idea was at the basis of it. So, you know, everyone is an artist in a way. Life can be lived artistically. Art, not only every person, but every molecule, every bacteria. It's a kind of ecological vision also. I mean, I'm interested in degrowth, in economic degrowth. I'm interested in ecology. But if I say that, oh, I'm an environmentalist, it's immediately false, because being Adornoen, when you say something, it's false the minute you say it. You know, it becomes this frame to just kind of. It's quite unethical, I think, to state, from my perspective, to state that too explicitly. But you could say that I'm in favor. I think the world will be better. What Karen Barad says, this committed to justice, or whatever you want to call it, this kind of commitment to justice. I have an idea in what direction maybe it would be a good idea that the planet went and people. And I have this idea. And I think art is a very, because of its amateurness, because it's an amateur activity, in the sense of amare and amatore, amatoriale. You know, Juliana Rebentisch is now writing a book about the amateur, the artist as the amateur. And so, because it is an amateur activity, you can learn painting really quickly. Somebody can give you 2 or 3 classes, and then you make a lot of paintings, for example. And even the so-called most professional artist is an amateur. because it's open to all possible knowledges, all possible media, and you take these leaps of going into things you don't know and bringing them together. It's possible that the artistic self, rather than being the prototype of the alienated creative laborer of the 21st century, could be also, but it sounds so naive, could be also the way to arrive at this identification between forms of life and forms of art. So that's kind of where I lie. And all of these are just examples and small cases, not case studies, because I'm not interested in making case studies. I'm not a historian. I'm interested in making cases and in being in the generative, the location where the generativeness the worlding can occur, setting the stage and the conditions for which these things can occur. It wasn't my idea to do the workshop for the Burman Buddhists. It wasn't even my idea to discuss whether they should be rebuilt or not, in a way. I mean, that all comes from Mike. All I did was think that Mike's work in Baghdad made sense for him to look at this. So it's like, hey, look at this, It's like, why don't you read this? So this is almost a mediator function, not a mediator, but a what? Facilitator. Yeah. Hermes. But I do. So Alison, go ahead. No, go ahead.
It was just when you were talking about the amateur.
Oh yeah.
I was just thinking that's where we need the Alfred Gell piece. It would be fantastic at that very point to read that piece and the role of technology, how he theorizes technology, the role of technology.
So yes, because for him the artist is not the amateur, actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well, that means no Mario Garcia Torres, though, does it? Well, okay. I mean, I can do that in 2 seconds, Mario, and then we can read. So it's just quick. So Mario was looking for this one hotel. This is a picture by Alighiero Boetti, with the sign, one hotel on the road. It's on Chicken Street. It's actually parallel to Chicken Street. And this is Alighiero in the garden of the one hotel one day with his owl. And this in Kassel is the first tapestry made in the one hotel, which was in 1971 when he was invited to the Documenta.
Look at the redness. Look at the scale of that redness.
Yes, look at the scale of that redness. Yeah, 1971. And this tapestry was, I think, well, it is, no, it's the 1 minute thing. So the 1 minute thing, and what was also shown is the faxes that were the previous to the Documenta work by Mario Garcia Torres looking for the one hotel by sending these fictional faxes from his studio where he was, when everyone was looking for Osama bin Laden, he was looking for the one hotel. And this is in the castle, we showed the faxes, so the earlier work, and we showed an earlier work called Alguna Vez, which he had made before going to Kabul. And this work actually has more to do with knowledge in the digital age, actually, and how you acquire knowledge through images on the internet, Wikipedia, this and that, finding people who may have a photograph from the 70s so how you can do a sort of archival research at a distance, and the limits and possibilities and the poetries of that, and also the problems of that. And when he came to Afghanistan, we looked for the one hotel, and there's a number of people that helped, and this is the one hotel as it is today, before he rented it. And then he rented the place, and as you can see, the building doesn't have the bars anymore. The previous photograph was taken from this direction. So here is the back of the garden, would be over here somewhere. And so this is the way that it was used by Mario as a place for meeting. That's Chus Martinez from the behind. That's Abbasin Nessar, who was the project manager in Kabul. This is the filmmaker and artist Barmak Akram from Afghanistan, and that's Natasha Zadar. And he made a film called Tea during his time there. And these are some film stills of tea. So it's the second film he made. Tea is a very interesting film. So he didn't only rent the one hotel and make it into a facilitation. He also made this film over the year and a half of being there. And the different seasons and snow in front of the one hotel and the different, it gives a sense of a long time, you know, a duration that over which period this film was made. And what occurs actually, I mean, it starts, this is a very early still from the film, it starts with this reference again to the mediated knowledge, to the non-direct knowledge, and it is a road trip. It's made under the form of a road trip where images, that's Mario in it, ultimately most of it was ended up filming in Mexico, because he's from Mexico. So what happens is that it mixes images of his landscape in Mexico with Afghanistan, areas near Bamiyan or on the way to Bamiyan, and it speaks about this overlapping confusion in his own mind between his life in Mexico and his life because he was dividing his time between Mexico and Kabul the way that Alighiero was dividing his time between Torino and Kabul. So it turns into this back and forth where you actually can't feel much of the difference in the way that it's done. The film was screened only once in Kassel for the same reasons that Francis Alice refused to show his film in Kassel, and it's on the internet, however. Anybody can watch it. And the same reason why Tacit Adin didn't want to, or Mike Rakovitz didn't want to show the workshop students' work. But it was shown every day in the exhibition there, and it exists as a piece today. So that's a sort of short version of his work. And I just take one more minute to switch over to the laptop, hopefully. Because as I mentioned to you, in this case, the reason I invited Mario was because he had been working on the one hotel, so our both interests joined. My story with Boetti, he had never met Boetti, and his own interest. And his preceding work, the one that I mentioned, was shown at the Reina Sofia a year or two before the dOCUMENTA opened. It's a 2009 piece. I'm going to show you just a few minutes about it. But this is the text that he speaks as a voiceover. Because it's in Spanish, I thought I would show it to you a minute. That's not the voiceover, though. This is the this is my essay. This is my text describing the piece Alguna Vez that I wrote for him as an introduction to his piece for the Reina Sofia. So this was in a kind of a brochure. So I wrote that it was a slide projection with a voiceover, with a controlled emotion. It was a very descriptive and neutral tone. It's about storytelling itself. It's interesting because in relation to your question about storytelling, it's actually about how a story is constructed and how a story is told and how different stories are embedded in a story. A kind of diaporama in the sense that it's slides that are one after the other. But he tells not only the story of Boetti in the 70s, but he tells his own story of searching for these information and elements in a particular choreography that brings together the movements from looking at satellite views to other forms of documentation. And the voiceover, that has something to do with the dOCUMENTA, the way that ends. But I wanted to tell you the voiceover a little bit, but I can't find it right now. Let me see if it's here. Here's the script. Okay, this is the script in English. It had a title at the end. It was Alguna Vez. I have all this junk, you know, it's like, God knows, before and after in the middle of artworks. So he says in Spanish, stories are made of fractions of other stories. Some details make some stories more interesting than others. Not all interconnected stories happen all happen at the same time. Sometimes they share places, other times they share people, and ideas happening concurrently, but they can also share subjects that are spread out in time. These are like the stories that Mike interwove. The story I'm about to tell has to do with one subject and some other stories, I have been told. Even though I might at times get carried away and let my subjective self be seen through, I will try to stick to the available data as much as possible. And the storyteller goes on and all. This picture was taken in the outskirts of Kabul, Afghanistan. One could say a partial view of Kabul is depicted, although it's not the main subject. It was taken sometime in 1971 by a man named Piet van Waardingen. So this is a historian might be collecting these materials, but it's used in a different way. We don't know who Pieter van Waardingen is. It's probably someone he found through the internet and over it. But the image is important because it is taken at the same time as our story begins, and so on and so forth. So now I'm not going to read you the whole translation, but I would like you to get briefly a sense of the atmosphere of the piece. Just to, I think the sound is on, yep.
Algunos relatos están hechos de fracciones de otros relatos.
It starts in the dark.
Estos pueden ser contados muchas veces,
They can be told
pero
many
cada vez que
times.
se cuentan se diferencian unos de otros por pequeños detalles.
Each time you tell the story, there are different details that distinguish it.
Son precisamente los detalles los que hacen que algunas narrativas resulten más interesantes que otras.
It's the details that make some more interesting.
Ciertos relatos se extienden en el tiempo,
Some take long
otros
time.
habitan tan solo breves instantes.
Some last just a few instants.
Otros más comparten el mismo momento.
Some are at the same time. Divide the
Algunos
same time.
comparten lugares y a veces personajes e ideas
Some
que se
share
presentan de
people.
manera concurrente o que viajan en el tiempo a través de ellos. La narración que estoy a punto de referir tiene que ver con un tema específico y con otras historias que me han contado.
Do you understand a little bit? This story that I'm
Aunque en
about to tell
ocasiones quizá me
is a
deje llevar por
specific
mi
one.
subjetividad, quiero dejar en claro que esta historia proviene de un hecho real.
I want
y
to
que
tell you that
intentaré
this story is
apegarme,
based
tanto
on a
como
real
sea
fact,
posible, a la información de la que dispongo.
and it's based on the information I have. This is 2 years before he
Se
set
trata
foot to
también de
Kabul.
un relato que no solo se conforma por lo que mis fuentes me han informado, sino además por todo aquello que he podido observar e inducir a través de una serie de fotografías de un lugar en el que jamás
Everything
he
that I
estado.
could, he's speaking about his sources, everything that he could observe and used. There's images. I just want to get to the first image or two and then we finish. Oh.
Esta imagen fue tomada a las afueras de Kabul, Afganistán. Podría decirse que representa una vista parcial de la ciudad, aunque este no haya sido su objetivo principal. Fue capturada en algún momento de 1971
Okay, so
por un
this is
individuo llamado Pieter van Waardingen.
okay. This is sort of the way it.
Allá de la presencia militar
is the-
que marca la diferencia central en esta imagen,
The
cabe
history
hacer notar un detalle menos visible.
during the Soviet
No solo
period.
las letras
He's
que
talking about a
componen la
difference
palabra aeropuerto
between
han
the way
pasado
that the
del
airport
rojo al
looked
azul,
in the Soviet
sino
period
que
and in the
además
period
las que
before.
formaban la palabra Kabul han desaparecido de la torre de control. No sé si tiene sentido iniciar una discusión acerca de esto. Sin embargo, con el propósito de dar continuidad a este razonamiento,
So so the whole history of Afghanistan is somehow embedded within this history and story of the one hotel.
después de esta fotografía nos hace replantearnos la ubicación del establecimiento,
So it just
otra vez desde la historia
it's-
del arte.
is talking about art history and how art
El
history
edificio
is told.
siempre ha estado ahí. Para los habitantes de Sharenau, Esto probablemente no tenga relevancia alguna, pues fue en realidad
For the people of
el
Châteauneuf,
One
it
Hotel
doesn't
el que
have
se
any
desvaneció de la
relevance.
memoria colectiva del barrio.
And most have forgotten the existence of this one hotel.
Queda por verse si la reaparición del hotel consigue sumarse a las narrativas sobre el tema que hasta hoy circula. Si bien algunas veces rumores y especulaciones consiguen
Sometimes
convertirse en
there's-
cánones históricos,
How do rumors and certain
otras veces
stories
los hechos
become
se tornan en
historical
un ruido sin
canons?
importancia.
And I mean, we could just analyze this for 2 days in an institute, you know. It's
Desde la
amazing.
perspectiva
It's
que
almost
nos dan los
finished.
años, es posible decir que Alighiero Boetti escogió bien. Kabul sea quizá el sitio ideal para repensar la historia y las distintas maneras en que se cuenta un relato.
Kabul and One Hotel is a
Este
perfect
es un
way of
lugar en el que
thinking
pareciera
about
que la mayoría
how
de
a
las
story
cosas
can be
se
told
conciben con
and
vistas a un
what are the
futuro
elements of a
incierto.
story.
Las historias, la gente y los edificios de la ciudad efectivamente se esfuman sin dejar rastro, pero en ocasiones también reaparecen
But
sin
sometimes
avisar.
they reappear. Cities, images, facades seem to disappear into the background, but sometimes on some occasions they reappear. It's beautiful. This is a beautiful piece. So there you go. I think that it's a little bit of an introduction to his work, very little, but enough to know that there was a story to tell.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I'm just saying that you're standing with this map behind where we stopped in that first question that you posed, and we've now actually begun to understand what this, three-dimensional, multi-leveled aspect of the way that you plotted out the 4 different sites and things, so that these particular stories. When we set this up, this idea of the Institute, it was an experiment. It's a kind of pedagogical experiment, which depends very much on those who come and those who stay and who join the journey with us. And one of the things that Carolyn and I have been talking about is, obviously what we're going to do in the next 2. She's also going to be visiting the university, not for an institute. She's also coming to the University of Huddersfield for a research event and other things. And then there's she's going to be working with graduate students. She's going to come to different seminars, and there will be a sort of in-house seminar for us to perhaps do more readings and keep up with some of these things through the next 6 months, when and with and without Carolyn. I mean, mostly the seminar program will be events, so we'll do some more reading. So we've got a very rich reader. We may add more to it for the next one, but we'll certainly obviously come back to various aspects.
Yes, I would like to add a few things.
Yeah, so there will be sort of additional. So what will happen now is that you've signed up, etc. You will get information. You will disseminate it to other people. You'll encourage other people to realize that if they're not here today, they have missed something quite extraordinary, and that people must learn to
It would be nice.
to
More
grasp
the
this.
merrier.
It's difficult for people who are not full-time students or whatever to find time, and we'll give them a lot more time to say to book. But do pass the message on that this is something very particular and spectacular to come to. So there will be a website eventually, and with slight additions, certain things will be there. So there's a perpetual record of this as a resource for your own learning, for your own thinking, for your own continuation, etc. But we, as I said at the beginning, we're starting an adventure that lasts now 7 months.
Yes,
In various ways, and it just is extraordinary to be with you, I think, and to have the chance to have this in-depth process, and every process of the way you think, the way you put things together, and the way you've actually put this particular event, I think is an instruction, not an instruction, but it is it's just changing our ways of thinking, and we will take time to absorb it and to keep reading and to keep thinking, and then we'll have these further meetings as we go along and discover what this particular way of working with you will be. So I mean, I don't want to kind of close this down, but I think maybe if people want to say anything, just to...
Yes, I think we have a little time, 15 minutes?
Or just a few minutes, because I think I promised...
we had to finish earlier
about
today.
5:30 today. But we can do that kind of off the record.
Off the record, we can, stay
so
a
I
little
think
bit.
what I'll do is formally thank you enormously for this.
Well, I would like to thank all of you formally as
no,
well.
We're just going to thank you.
Well, thank you.
And then we can formally bring it to the end, and if you do have further questions, we
Yes,
can chat amongst ourselves.